my beautiful beings. Before we get started with today's story, I just wanted to say thank you for the overwhelming support and love you guys have shown me, and thank you for joining me on my journey. Also, I want to thank today's video sponsor, Tubby Energy. Today's video is brought to you by Tubby Energy, the ultimate energy drink designed for gamers, creators, and anyone who needs a boost without the crash. Unlike those other energy drinks loaded with sugar and junk, Tubby is packed with clean ingredients to fuel your focus, energy, and performance all day long. Whether you're grinding through a gaming session or just need that extra push to get through your day, Tubby's got you covered. And the best part, it's jitter-free. No weird crashes, just clean, sustained energy. Check out the link in the description below and use my code WETT at checkout to save 20% off your order. Yes, that's right, not 10, but a whopping 20% off. Power up with Tubby Energy and stay on top of your game. A huge thank you to Tubby for sponsoring this video. Alright, let's dive into today's video. I was just 16 when I learned the ritual. I won't repeat it here. Tampering with the demonic forces can be risky, and I cannot promise it will turn out the same way it did for me. Demons aren't what you'd expect. That was the first thing I learned. Much like normal people, demons can be unpredictable, and it is both wonderful and terrible. My name is Monica Del Rosso, and I was alone. I had no friends at school. I felt like my family resented me for not having the same drive as them, and I was miserable. It led me down a dark path, and perhaps I didn't have any right to go exploring it, but I did. As I won't share the details of the ritual, I won't tell you how I came across it either. Let's just say that if you climb down the rabbit hole that is demonology, you will find something real sooner or later. It took me countless tries before I found something that worked, but as I read the ancient words and the candles in my room flickered, I didn't have much hope. The ritual itself had promised a succubus, nothing too out there. I was 16 and thinking more with my libido than my brain, so demonic sex had seemed like a good idea at the time. My plan had been to attempt the ritual, and then, when it failed, I'd go to Pornhub and air my grievances there. I never imagined that it would actually work. As I spoke those words, I felt a chill move through the air. Not quite a gust of wind, something much softer and distinct in its own way. I could see my own breath in front of me as I exhaled. The candles flickered, then slowly died. My heart was racing in my chest as I watched them fade and tried to convince myself that this was nothing but a coincidence. Well, well, aren't you a little young to be summoning demons? The voice was a playful whisper in my ear, and it was not one that I recognized. It was low, sweet, and sultry. I spun around, almost knocking myself over as I did. She stood behind me, tall and beautiful, with long dark hair. She was fully nude and seemed human, yet something seemed off about her. She was too beautiful, too perfect. There was something in her eyes as well, a surreal light that outed her as something beyond human. She crouched down in front of me, almost straddling me. Her eyes bored into mine. "Oh, you didn't think it would work, did you?" she teased. She reached out to cup my chin. Her hands were surprisingly cold. No, was all I managed to say. I'm not surprised. These days it's mostly amateurs. She grinned at me, and I realised that I probably wasn't the first dumb teenager who'd summoned her. She didn't seem annoyed though. If anything, she seemed amused. "Well, amateur or not, you called me and I came." She leaned down to whisper in my ear, "Would you like to make me come, my mistress?" Now that was too much, and I just sat there, absolutely paralysed. If I'd ever had any intention intention on using my newly summoned succubus for her intended purpose, then that intention was long gone. The succubus just stared down at me, unsurprised in the least by my silence. She just chuckled, then stood up, stretching herself out. No. Well, that's fine then. I'm not going anywhere. I do quite like the mortal realm. It's hard not to miss it when you're gone. Mortal realm? I asked. I watched as she looked around my room. The here and now, she replied. I assume the ritual came with some context. I'm not exactly an American citizen. You're from hell, right? I asked. She shrugged. There are many different names for it. Hell isn't the one I'd choose. There are plenty of places more deserving of that title. If you're asking if I'm going to take your soul, then no. That's not what I do, Monica. Her eyes darted over to me. A knowing smile crossed her lips. My heart skipped a beat in my chest, although I honestly shouldn't have been that surprised that she knew my name. Well, what do you do? I asked. I do what I was summoned to do, plain and simple. There's many different rituals out there, and so many entities like me. You might call them demons. I'd say that's inaccurate. Yes, some are demons and they will typically just kill you the moment they see you. Some take souls, some don't even have minds of their own, and some, like me, are just here for fun. It's a nice little opportunity to come back for a while. Like a little vacation. She flopped down onto my bed and stretched again. I could hear some of the bones in her spine popping. Vacation, I murmured. Wait, so you come here for fun? What's it like where you usually are? Well, it doesn't have an official name, although I suppose I've always thought of it as gloom. It's quiet, dark, and nobody comes around much. I'm not much of a fan of it myself, although I suppose it's better than being dead. At least you get to come back, and honestly, the people you meet are always so fascinating. Everything that she said invited questions. I wanted to know more about the gloom. I wanted to know what she meant by better than being dead, and I wanted to know just what kind of people she'd met. She looked at me, knowing that the questions would come, and if they didn't, then something else would. She lay naked on my bed, as if she was waiting for me. I don't think she expected the first one, though. Do you have a name? One eyebrow rose. I don't think that was a question she expected. A name, she repeated. A soft laugh escaped her. Seriously, all the things you could have asked, and that's what you start with? Well, it's a practical place to start, I said. She actually laughed at that. Well, I suppose it is, she replied. Since you asked, I go by Kezia. She laughed again, a light little chuckle. It's been a while since I've had to introduce myself. You're an interesting mortal. Thanks, you're an interesting demon, I guess. I paused, barely able to contain my next question. What's the gloom like? Is that like hell or something? Kezia sat up, a tiny grin on her face. She seemed to be less interested in putting on the normal succubus act and more interested in me personally. I think by then it was clear to both of us that this would not be like a normal summoning for her, and I think that had her interest piqued. She answered all of my questions, and she told me secrets that mortals were not meant to know. She told me about the afterlife, a dark and endless world where the dead wander. She told me about the people and entities she'd encountered over the millennia. Sorcerers looking for thralls, priests looking to destroy something that they deemed as evil and naive, young people such as myself, who only summoned her just to see if they could. I stayed up all night talking to her, and the hours passed in what felt like minutes. Before I knew it, it was 6 a.m, and Kezia slowly rose to her feet. She yawned, and I wondered if a being like her could even get tired. Before Before I could ask, though, she spoke. "Ah, but there's my time," she said softly. "This was nice. You really are a different kind of mortal than I'm used to." She stretched again, spreading out her arms, and she didn't seem to care that I took the opportunity to admire her body, just like she hadn't minded the dozens of other times I'd done so. "Can I see you again?" I asked. Kezia paused. Her eyes shifted over towards me. Her smile never faded. "So long as you remember the ritual," she said. "I always come when I'm called." When I blinked, she was gone, and I was alone in my bedroom. The candles had either burnt down or died, and pale morning sunlight shone through my window. The room felt warmer without her, but also a lot emptier. I stared at my bed, where she'd made herself comfortable, and slowly climbed onto it. It was cold, but soothingly so. My exhaustion hit me all at once, and I drifted off, still thinking of Kezia, and knowing that I needed to see her again. I was exhausted at school the next day, although that wasn't anything new. I skipped English class to try and catch some sleep in the library. There were quiet study cubicles that granted me plenty of privacy, and I was only rarely disturbed. Still, my nap felt more well-deserved. School wanted to teach me about Shakespeare and quadratics, which are both things that will never help you in the real world. Unless, of course, you file your taxes in iambic pentameter along a parabola, in which case, who the hell are you? Because your life has been far more interesting than mine. Kezia had taught me so much, more important and interesting things. She had peeled back the veil of reality and allowed me a glimpse into the other side. She told me of beautiful and terrible things, a dark afterlife, secret realms deep in the woods where nameless beings hold court, a hell where all life existed only to feed a great being who made up the sky. I needed to know more. It was a few nights before I managed to summon her again. I needed to stock up on supplies, candles and whatnot. I brought some food this time. I didn't know if she needed to eat, but I wanted to give her the option. My parents weren't home, so I was able to get started earlier. That way, I could spend more time with Kezia. The ritual was easier this time. The words rolled more gently off my tongue, and I knew that the more I spoke them, the better I'd get. I could feel that familiar chill in the air, and my heart leapt for joy in my chest. Kezia was back. "Did you miss me, mortal?" I heard her voice behind me once again, and turned to see her stretching out before she made herself comfortable on my bed. The sultry look in her eyes silently asked me if this time I was going to use her for more conventional purposes. My answer, of course, was to ask her a question. "I just wanted to check in on you. How are you doing today?" Yes, I did summon a demon just to ask her how she was doing. Kezia just smiled at me. It was a warm, charming smile with something genuine in it. "Better," was all she said. I started summoning Kezia whenever I could. It wasn't just the lust that drew me to her. Yes, she was beautiful. She was always naked whenever she was summoned, and I saw everything. I knew that if I'd wanted to, she wouldn't have stopped me, but, well, it's not that I didn't want to try anything with her, it just didn't feel right to do so. I wouldn't even have known what to do anyways. My questions to her gradually became less about whatever world she inhabited, and more about her in general, and it wasn't long before questions turned into conversation, and conversation turned into something else entirely. "So," I remember her asking. Her body was so close to me on the bed. I could feel my heart fluttering in my chest. I'd bought Kezia a bathrobe that she could wear around me, but she didn't seem to care if her body was exposed. I could still see the curve of her breast through the open robe, and it was pulled up along her thighs, granting me an ample view of her hips. "Which screen am I?" She held the controller in her hands as we played together. She absolutely sucked at Mario Kart, but she was also just a beginner. Still, she seemed to be enjoying herself, and that was what meant the most to me. "The bottom one," I said. "Oh, so I'm your bottom then?" She giggled, and I playfully nudged her. "You're the worst." "Darling, I'm a succubus. You really shouldn't be so surprised." The smile on her face was soft but meaningful. Every time she laughed, it made me feel happier than I had in a very long time. Video games, movies, just regular conversation. Kezia became the best friend I'd never had before, and what was better, I could see her whenever I wanted. My parents were none the wiser, of course, and Kezia was always gone by morning. She was always there for me, though. Even when I came home crying, upset over something or another, I could summon her, and she'd be there for me. I don't know how many times I lay my head in her lap and cried about something trivial, like my shitty relationship with my parents, while she stroked my hair and whispered soothing things to me. Then, when she got a chance, she would always lift up my face and cup my chin as if she were about to kiss me. She'd smile that gentle smile of hers and she'd say, "How about we take your mind off of it, She always had a solution. Sometimes it would be a story. Sometimes we'd play a game or watch a movie. Sometimes we'd just talk. I loved her. I was in love with her, and I think that she knew it too. She never asked me about that, though, and I never said it. It was something unspoken between us, and frankly, I think she was just happy to have a friend. From what she told me, Gloom was rather lonely. At first, I was sure some other shoe would drop. I've heard tales of people summoning demons and suffering some horrible price. Some of those stories even came from Kezia herself. If there ever was any drawbacks to summoning her, I never encountered them. Weeks turned into months. I adjusted my sleep schedule to stay up all night and be with Kezia. After school, I'd sleep and wake up after my parents had gone to bed. Then, I'd stay up all night with her and go to school the next morning. I spent less time asleep in the library that way, and I managed to pull my grades back up and finish high school on a reasonably strong note. I was hardly an honours student, but I did all right for myself. With the end of high school, though, came a new chapter in my life. I didn't know how to approach college. I didn't know what I wanted to do, and honestly, I was intimidated. I'd just turned 18, and I saw college as a massive unknown. A dark void in my future with something even darker beyond that. My parents had their ideas for what I should get into. They wanted me to get into law, and I didn't want to rush into something I wasn't even sure I wanted to do. During the final year of high school, there was a lot of tension between us. I watched my previously mediocre relationship with them deteriorate into outright resentment, especially with my dad. Nowadays, I'm sure he only wanted what he thought was best for me. He was probably just trying to help. But the thing is, he did exactly the opposite. We started fighting what felt like every day, and I started just outright avoiding him. I hated the fact that I couldn't be open with them. I hated the fact that I needed to fake everything. And the few times where I was genuine, they just spat in my face. Things came to a head the night of my high school graduation. After the convocation, he really tore into me. It was supposed to be a victory. Instead, all he talked about over the dinner after the ceremony was, "Well, what are you going to do next? You've got no college plans. Everyone else has something figured out. Why don't you?" I don't remember what exactly it was he said that set me off, but I was already angry with him. All it took was one little spark before I snapped at him. Would it kill you to be happy for me just this once? That was what started the fight. He yelled about how he was happy for me, but just looking out for my future. I yelled about how I just wanted him to get off my fucking back. I don't remember most of what we said to each other. I just remember that I ended up crying before I stormed off to my bedroom and locked the door behind me. He pounded on it, screaming for me to come back out so we could finish, but I didn't have it in me to do so. I just hid under the covers of my bed like a child and waited for him to leave me alone. I think I slept, if only for a little while after he left. What I do remember is he'd gone to bed long ago by the time I finally got out of bed. Quietly, I laid out the candles around my bedroom like I did almost every night and lit them. I needed Kezia. I needed someone to talk to. "Monica, why so sad?" asked a familiar soothing voice behind me. I felt Kezia's arms wrap around me and her head on my shoulder. I was already trembling. I hadn't intended to start crying again, but I did. This was nothing she hadn't heard before from me, but she still held and soothed me all the same. I worked so hard for this. I worked so hard to graduate and he doesn't care. Nothing I do is good enough for him. He's never fucking satisfied. Well, I'm sure he's trying to just push you along. It sounds like he's trying to help, but just doesn't know much about how to do it right. Don't play the devil's advocate, I snapped, harsher than I'd intended. Kezia didn't seem to care though. All she did was chuckle at my phrasing. All right, like I said, he clearly doesn't know how to do it right, she said. I just want to leave, I said. I don't want to be here anymore. I don't want to be around them anymore. Jesus, I haven't wanted to be around them for years. I feel like I can't talk to my dad. Every time I'm around him, I'm stressed, and it doesn't help that he always seems to know the exact thing to say to piss me off. Then there's the relentless fucking teasing. Every little thing I do, they mock. It's like they don't take me seriously, and it's so fucking patronising. I can't take it anymore. I'm doing the best I can. Why the fuck can't they see that? Why the fuck can't they just be proud of me? The tears were flowing now. I found myself trembling, and I hardly seemed to notice Kezia hugging me closer. I want to go, I said through the sobs. I just want to fucking leave. Then why don't you? Kezia asked, and I paused. Her head rested comfortably on my shoulder. Leave? I can't. I don't know what I'd do out there. Drive. Move along. Maybe that's what you need to see the world. Right now you've got so little in the way of experience. I sat in silence. Maybe she was right. But what about money? I asked. I'd need to pay for food, for gas. I don't have that kind of money. Kezia cupped my chin in her hand and turned my head to look her in the eyes. I will take care of that. Trust me when I say that I can. I wouldn't let you go on the road alone, you know. My heart was racing. What she was saying sounded too good to be true. It almost didn't make sense, and yet Keziah sounded so sure. You'd fade away though, I said. Every morning you'd be gone. Not necessarily, she said. There's another kind of ritual that can summon me. This one is a bit more advanced and a bit more long-term. Think of it as a binding ritual. I'll stay in your world, with you, until the terms of the ritual are fulfilled, and I don't envision that being a problem. I stared at her, and there was not a doubt in my mind that everything she said was true. I'm sure some people would have called me an idiot for trusting her. They would have said I was making a mistake, trusting what was effectively a demon. This was Kezia, though, and I knew that she was nothing dark or wicked. I knew that she was sincere. Slowly, I nodded. Show me, I said. The ritual was complex, far more complex than anything I could have done on my own, but Kezia guided my hand. She showed me how to bind her, and once it was done, we took the car and drove as far as we could. Kezia sat in my passenger seat, nude as ever, and looked out the window with a quiet, contented smile. You know, I've never been in a car before, Kezia said. Funny, right? I've heard about them, but they were a bit after my time. That reminded me about a question that had been on my mind for a very long while. Were you ever alive? I asked, and Kezia glanced over at me, an eyebrow raised. Like, as a human, I added. Once, she said after a few minutes. A very, very long time ago. I barely remember it, if I'm honest. It feels like a dream. Once, I think I had a husband. I think I had children. She trailed off, searching her mind for old memories. The look on her face was quiet and sorrowful. You know, I never actually imagined I'd be spending my afterlife as a succubus, but here we are. I imagine that I'm really not bound to this anymore. I don't know if I ever was. Truth be told, I've never stopped to think about it. Why not? I asked. I like it. Not the sex that varies from person to person. I like coming back. I like seeing what the future holds in all its beauty and ugliness. I like the familiar faces. More than a few mortals have passed on and met me in the gloom, and when they do, it's always comforting for them to see me. I suppose a familiar face makes it easier for them. Is Kezia your original name? I asked, and she seemed to think it over. Yes, she said after a while. It is. I wouldn't try looking me up. I don't think I ever left much of an impact on history while I was still alive, and I doubt the record keeping back then was anywhere close to as good as it is now. I can't imagine I was buried in anything but a shallow grave, and if there's anything left of me besides the dust, it's all long forgotten. I've been dead a very long time, Monica, longer than you could possibly imagine. I sat in silence beside her as we drove, thinking about what she'd said and hanging on to her every word. I realised in the back of my mind that she probably had manipulated me after all, but not for any malicious purpose. I couldn't imagine how badly she longed to see what the world had become firsthand, and I wanted to show it to her. Well, you're here now, I said. Did you want to get McDonald's? Kezia looked at me, then laughed. She sat back in her seat, smiling sweetly as she did. I don't think I'd mind, she finally said. Maybe we should stop and get me some clothes first. I feel as though I might draw some eyes as I am now. Kezia kept her word. Money wasn't an issue for us as we travelled. The only time we ran into anything remotely resembling an issue was when we stepped into a clothing store for the first time to get something to wear. I realised I'd never seen the true extent of Kezia's powers as she leaned on the counter and spoke softly to the clerk. There's nothing to see here, she said as she looked into the clerk's eyes. I'm just here to pick up a few things. It's already paid for. The clerk just stared quietly at her before she smiled. Yes, of course, she said. Take whatever you need. With that, they returned to their business, ignorant to the fact that we'd even existed. What was that? I asked her, as she perused the aisles of the store. She took the first dress that she saw and draped it over herself. It was better than being naked, although I would miss the view. A little benefit of my profession, she said. You'd be surprised just how much I can actually do. Besides, that's a rather common ability. You see it mostly in sirens and fae, or their offspring, but not quite exclusive to them. Sirens, or fae. She'd mentioned them in passing before, but I'd never taken it particularly seriously, and I didn't see the need to question it much further. Kezia didn't linger long. She took a few summer dresses, along with anything else she needed, and we were on the road again before long, with a bag of McDonald's drive-through, and we never looked back. We slept in motels and drove during the day, while Kezia ensured we wanted for nothing. I didn't have a destination in mind. I just followed the road, but it felt nice. I felt contented. And hell, I was free for the first time in a very long time. I got a few phone calls from my parents on the first day, and it was a while nerve to answer. I won't repeat that conversation. It didn't go well, but they didn't convince me to turn around. I knew I needed to do this, and I knew that so long as I had Kezia at my side, I'd be okay. I remember the look in her eyes as we reached New York. She stared out at the skyline, utterly speechless for the first time since I'd met her. I realised that she'd probably never seen a city skyline before. We got there in the evening and everything shimmered so beautifully in the twilight. "It's beautiful," I remember her saying as we moved towards it, and I remember thinking that she was beautiful too. We spent a few weeks in New York, taking in everything the city had to offer and living a life without consequence or responsibility. We were tourists and lovers exploring the world around us. I bought a camera on the first day, and I caught a picture of Kezia on the Brooklyn Bridge in the early morning sunlight. Her dark hair framed her face perfectly, and she had a bashful, shy expression on her face. It was the first picture I'd ever taken of her, and it was easily one of my favourites. It became easy to forget what she was, a dead thing I'd summoned back just to be with me. With Kezia bound to this realm, she was almost entirely human, and so long as she never completed the purpose she had been bound for, she'd stay with me forever. We could live the way we did forever, never having to look back or care about anything. We could be free. From New York, we went to Washington, and then made our way south. We spent over 2 months in Florida. Weeks of that were spent at Disney World, where we ran around like children. We rode the rides, and in the evenings we drank and danced and partied like there really was no tomorrow. I didn't think that this kind of life could have ever been for me, but there I was, with Kezia by my side, and happier than I'd ever been. We'd started sharing a bed by the time we got to Florida, and I won't lie, I loved the feeling of her body against mine as we cuddled in the aftermath of our hedonistic days. I liked the feeling of her arms around me. I liked the way she stroked my hair and said my name. I never touched her. I never could take things a step further. I loved her, of course. I was in love with her. But I knew what would happen if I did. She was a succubus, after all. Her purpose was clear, and I wasn't ready for this to end just yet. After Orlando and Disney, there was Miami and Tampa. I remember walking along the beach with Kezia at sunset, looking out at the waves as they crashed to the horizon and feeling her hand in mine. "You know, it's funny," she said after a while. "I just realised I never saw the ocean while I was alive." "Never?" I asked. She shook her head. "No, I wasn't exactly well off. I was a farmer. Everyone was a farmer back then. Our village was small and inland. Travel wasn't really a thing back then. Hell, Christianity and the idea of hell was barely even a thing." She chuckled. "How times have changed." I stared at her, painted golden by the dying sunlight, and I held her hand tightly. "Can I ask you a personal question? If you'd like. How did you die?" Kezia paused. Her smile faltered, but only a little. "Plague," she said after a while. "I think, at least, the memories are fuzzy. My husband got it first. I think he died before I did. I just tried to take care of my children, even when I felt the sickness tearing me apart. I remember my oldest. He seemed to be getting better. I sent him away and..." She paused, the memories flooding back to her. "A few days later, I was so weak that I couldn't get up. My youngest, he didn't make it. There were doctors. They did what they could, but I just remember coughing. My lungs hurt. Everything burned and I felt cold. It was like falling asleep, but so much more intense. Kezia was squeezing my hand tighter now, and I pulled her into a hug. "I'm sorry," is fine, she assured me, although her head rested on top of mine. I knew you'd ask eventually. Death is, well, it's not something the brain can comprehend. I suppose everyone experiences it differently, and the memories of it can be fuzzy for the dead. It's not like I didn't come out better for it on the other side, at least. She finally laughed with a bit of her old humour back. Did your oldest son survive? I asked. Long enough, she replied. When I saw him in the gloom, I didn't recognise him. He'd grown. He was a man. He'd had his own family, found his own path. I imagine he'd lived longer than I ever did. I don't believe I even made it past 20. I was happy for him, though. I only ever saw him once, though. I didn't exactly stay around the remnants of my old life, given what I was. My husband wouldn't have approved, but the vows were until death, and both of us were long gone. Her fingers brushed through my hair. Besides, I'm happier right here, right now, with you. I looked up at Keziah. Her eyes were soft and loving. My heart fluttered in my chest at the sight of her, and I knew what was going to happen. She was going to do what I could not, and I wanted it. I felt her lips on mine, and I leaned into her kiss. I held her close, savouring every sensation as the waves crashed against the sand. I wanted so much more, and I realised that she wanted it too. But I knew that we couldn't. I couldn't bind her again, not by myself, and I didn't have the materials to summon her to help on hand. Without Kezia, I'd be stranded. We continued our road trip, moving through the states and seeing what was there for us, but as Florida turned into Georgia, Alabama and Mississippi, the trip began to lose its steam. Every now and then, I'd get a call from my family, usually my mother checking in on me to ensure I was still alive. As time had gone by, she'd slowly begun to accept what I'd done. My father wouldn't even talk to me, and that bothered me more than it should have. It was somewhere in Mississippi that I realised I was starting to miss them, and that I began to think about what was next for me. Dad wanted me to go to college, but even through all the driving, I still didn't know what I wanted. Naturally, I talked to Kezia. I think the thing you honestly need to consider is what purpose do you want your life to have, she said as we drove. You live in an unprecedented time where you can be whatever you want. You can make a mark on the world like no other generation has before you. You just need to decide how you want to do it. I really did think on that as we drove, and it was a while before I came up with an answer. I want to help people, I finally said, like you helped me. Maybe not by taking them on a road trip, but, well, having someone to talk to always helps, I guess. Maybe that's it, Kezia said. You're not the only person who's felt the way you did. You won't be the last one either. I can think of far less noble things than to help people like yourself. She was right. As paths in life went, it wasn't the worst idea. I thought for a while, and the more I thought, the more I liked it. We'd picked up a laptop some time ago, and that evening I began looking at colleges. I didn't look close to home. I liked being away from my family. I liked having my own life, and honestly, I'd liked Florida. I found a university with a social sciences program in Tampa that I had a shot at, and I started working on my application, and it stayed in the back of my mind until we hit the road again. We were in a motel room in Texas when I got the phone call from my mother. I expected it to be the same check-in that I usually got, but her tone was different. There wasn't much of a formal greeting. Did you apply to the University of Tampa? She'd asked, and I paused. How had she known? Had they sent me something? I'd used my home address, of course. Yeah, I did, I said. I sat up on the bed I was on. Keziah was in the shower. Well, they sent you a letter. I hope you don't mind that we looked since you weren't exactly around to open it. There was a can of worms to be opened there, but I didn't want to get into that. I was more interested in the contents of the letter. Wait, you did? What did it say? Well, you've been accepted. But why didn't you talk to us about this? Social studies in Tampa, where did this come from? My heart was starting to race. Accepted. I had been accepted. Oh God, I'd been accepted. My mum was bitching me out for not running the decision past her and my dad. But I couldn't care less. I wanted to scream. I wanted to cheer and cry. I'd actually done it. I'd been accepted and I was going to university. I dropped my phone before I'd even noticed it. My mum was calling my name, but I didn't care. I'd never actually jumped for joy before, but I really couldn't contain myself. I heard the bathroom door open and saw Kezia step out, still wet from the shower and a look of confusion on her face. Monica, what's happening? I didn't care that she was wet. I threw my arms around her and hugged her close. I got accepted. Kezia stared at me for a moment before it clicked and her arms wrapped around me. She let out the most adorable squeal of delight I'd ever heard. Did you? That's incredible. I knew you would be. I leaned up to kiss her before she could say anything else, then realised I'd left my mum on hold, as it were. I looked over at my phone on the bed to see that Mum had hung up. I figured I'd need to call her back later. I'm proud of you, Kezia said. You've really come a long way. I looked back at her, smiling. I couldn't have done it without you, I said. All I did was give you a push, she replied. She approached me slowly and cupped my chin, making me look up into her eyes. You did it all yourself, so give yourself the credit. You're a lot more incredible than you think, Monica. That much I'm certain of. I've met a lot of people throughout my life, and none of them were half of what you are. I love you. I'm happy for you, and I'm proud of you. I didn't realise that I was crying until I felt the tears stream down my cheeks. Our lips met again, and this time I gave in to her completely. For a moment, I could have cared less about the consequences. Our kisses led us to the bed, and Kezia welcomed my every touch. She was gentle with me, lovingly removing my clothes and leaving me bare in front of her for the first time. My heart raced, but I wanted her. I wanted her more than I wanted anything in my life. Monica, she whispered. Her voice was so sensual and alluring, just like it had always been. I loved it whenever she said my name. She lay close to me, on top of me, her lips pressed against mine, and found tender spots in the crook of my neck to kiss and to nip, as she did what she was always meant to do. She gently guided my hands and showed me how to satisfy her, and for one perfect night, I belonged entirely to her. She was gone in the morning. The spell that had bound her was broken, and I lay naked in our bed, knowing that the road trip was over. It was time to go home. I tried to summon her again before I left that motel, of course, but it didn't work. Somewhere in the back of my mind, I'd known it wouldn't. Mum lent me the money I needed to finally drive home, and the drive felt heavy and dull. Every night, I tried again to summon Kezia, but no matter how hard I tried, she never came back. I'm not sure why. I knew it wasn't something I'd done. No, Kezia never would have abandoned me, not after all we'd been through. When I got home, I got an earful from my dad. My admission still wasn't enough for him. He didn't like what I'd chosen. He didn't like that I wanted to go to Tampa. I didn't care, though. I'd already made up my mind. It was a few months before I stopped trying to summon Kezia. Life got too busy to try. There was the move to Tampa and the start of my courses. Another chapter of my life was beginning, and thought I missed my beloved Succubus, I still looked forward to it. And then I met Hannah. She came up to me one day while I was studying in the library and asked me, "Is this seat taken?" as she gestured to the spot across from me. We hit it off almost instantly after that. Hannah was a tall, lovely woman with dark hair who started in my program the term after I did. She reminded me of Kezia a bit, from the way she looked at me to the way she smiled. I liked that. We met in the library to study every now and then, and usually we'd talk. We'd only known each other for a few days when I asked what brought her to Tampa. "I had a bit of an accident about a few months ago," she'd said, a bit nervously. "I was driving a bit too fast and my car skidded. Apparently, the doctors thought I was dead at first, but I guess I found a way back. After that, you could say I got a second chance at life." She smiled when she said that. Something told me that I might enjoy sociology at Tampa. I just got a feeling that I might meet some interesting people. It's a good way to get out of the gloom, don't you think? Her eyes met mine, and there was a knowing expression in them, an expression I recognised. "You'd be surprised just how much I can actually do," Kezia had said to me once, and she was right. I was surprised. "Yeah, I think it is," I replied. My hand inched closer to hers, and I felt her fingers lace with mine. Hannah's sweet grin widened as she squeezed my hand affectionately as she said the words that confirmed what I already knew. "I missed you, mortal,